If I was trying to interfere in another country's election, I'd try really hard to hide the fact that I was doing it and prevent anyone knowing who was behind the whole operation. I'd be pretty upset to wake up one morning and find my name and all the details of my activity spread across every newspaper on the planet. But that's exactly what happened to the Russian hackers who broke into the Democratic National Committee. I'm going to talk about where they went wrong in this episode of the Ntrepid Cast. Hi, I'm Lance Cottrell, Chief Scientist at Ntrepid, and I want to start off by saying all the information I'm going to talk about today comes from primarily Mueller's indictment of the DNC hackers, in addition to some other public domain reporting. This is all open source information, but it goes into a huge amount of detail about exactly what kind of activities were engaged in, and from my perspective, more importantly, shows clearly many of the mistakes the attackers made that led to them being so thoroughly uncovered, identified, and exposed. These hackers made something like 8 different kinds of Tradecraft mistakes when they were trying to hide their identity. Everything from reusing IP addresses and computers between different identities, to trusting in the anonymity of Bitcoin, to such simple mistakes as forgetting to turn on their anonymity tools. And all of these led to a detailed ability to understand who they were and what they did, down to the individual named officers involved in the situation. The most important thing that these hackers were trying to hide was that their 2 primary personas of Guccifer 2.0, the hacker, and DC Leaks, the purported hacktivist group publishing these stolen documents, was that the 2 entities were in fact the same entity, and both of them were in fact Russian hackers. That's the core thing that they needed to hide right off the bat. So one of the first mistakes they made was actually using well-known Russian government malware called X-Agent. They used this to take over the computers and to exfiltrate data off of the compromised computers of Democratic National Committee members. So just by a security expert looking at that computer, they could immediately deduce that it was very likely that the attacker was in fact a Russian operative. Now, when they were controlling this malware and exfiltrating this data, they made the decision to use servers in the United States as their relay. And this was a bit of a security trade-off for them. On the one hand, the fact that a US computer was connecting to a US server is less suspicious than that computer connecting to, say, a Russian server or some other foreign server. However, because that server is sitting in the United States, once it's discovered, it becomes very easy for law enforcement or intelligence organizations to gain control of the server, gain the cooperation of the ISP, monitor all the traffic in and out, and basically unwind all of the protection that that cutout was supposed to be providing. And I think this was really a tradecraft mistake, in that hiding that information was paramount, and using a server located in any reasonably friendly to the US country would have made it much more difficult for US law enforcement and intelligence services, while still providing the same level of obfuscation and being not too susceptible to being detected as a strange connection. Another interesting tell that these were Russian hackers is that all of the phishing emails sent to compromise these computers were sent from a Russian email service. Now, that's very common in Russia. It's a very popular service, but would probably not be the first choice of some random hacker. A random hacker would be far more likely to either use one of the big well-known servers in the US, or a service located in their geographic area that's popular among their compatriots. Someone in Romania picking a Russian email server doesn't seem like the obvious choice. Another interesting mistake was not setting up cover stories in advance. Very shortly after the announcement that the attacker appeared to be Russian, a character appeared named Guccifer 2.0, claiming to be a Romanian hacker and taking responsibility for the hack. The interesting thing, though, is that all of the accounts and social media presence surrounding that identity were created within 24 hours after that report was released to the public. So this clearly appears to be a scrambled reaction to that accusation, rather than being some existing hacker choosing to expose and take credit for this activity himself. Further undermining this new identity, claiming to be Romanian, is the fact that, at least in the early stages of the investigation, this entity did not speak Romanian very well. In fact, reporters outside of the indictment tried to communicate with him in Romanian and found that his ability to communicate in that language was actually quite weak, and many of the constructions used apparently were Russian. Now, later on, the Guccifer persona suddenly became much more adept. Its English got better, its Russian got better, its Romanian got better, and that would suggest that the original person running the Guccifer identity was replaced with far more proficient operators who actually had the linguistic skills necessary to pull off the ruse. But of course, by that point, the cat was out of the bag, and it was fairly well understood that this was an attempt to cover up the activity done rather clumsily. Perhaps the biggest gotcha and the biggest mistake that these attackers made was in their technical tradecraft. Now, most of the time when they were communicating in these personas and setting up their operations, they were using a commercial VPN service called Elite VPN, which is located in Russia. Again, an odd choice for a non-Russian hacker, particularly given the extreme surveillance of the internet within Russia. But be that as it may, they were using that service for all of their activities most of the time. And that's the key. They just literally forgot to turn on this commercial VPN on at least one occasion, directly exposing their IP address. And what was that IP address? Well, it was a GRU headquarters IP address, which immediately ends the entire attempt to hide who you are and where you're coming from. And this is really a 101 kind of mistake, is employing tradecraft that doesn't fail closed. It should not be possible to accidentally forget to turn something on. And if you're going to use a commercial VPN because that's appropriate to your cover, then you never want to access it directly, so that if something goes wrong, if some data is exposed through a side channel attack or carelessness, you're still hidden behind your tradecrafted IP address that's accessing that VPN. You want to have layers involved. And the failure to do that really implies amateur level skills on the part of these attackers. Now, rule 1 of running multiple identities is that you don't cross the streams. It's the classic Ghostbuster lesson. And part of that is don't use the same email accounts, don't use the same credit cards, don't use the same source IP addresses to connect to both of them. But over and over again, we see the DNC attackers doing exactly this. They're logging into the accounts that they're managing and setting up web servers for DC Leaks and for Guccifer from the same computers, from the same source IP addresses. When they're making payments, they're using the same pool of Bitcoin that they purchased and mined. And because the Bitcoin ledger is public, you can see the source of every coin on the entire chain that's ever existed. And it's very easy to trace back the fact that all of the different entities that were buying things as part of this operation all got their coins from exactly the same source. And the odds of that happening randomly are mind-bogglingly unlikely. Sort of the same unlikely as all the molecules of air in this room suddenly deciding to be in one corner. It's not forbidden by the laws of physics, but you're never going to see that happen. And so this looks like exactly how everything fell apart. Because they forgot to use the VPN, their IP address was exposed. This clearly indicated that these were Russian activists. The malware that they were using was Russian and was phoning home to US servers, which could be surveilled, and so therefore the connections from there back to Russia were easily detected. The reuse of IP addresses and funding sources and entities between different activities made it easy for law enforcement to quickly see all of the different entities involved and discover new ones that they might not have even been aware of because of the way in which they're tied together. And I think that explains why the Mueller indictment was able to be so incredibly detailed about the attacker's activities and discover so many of the different elements used in this attack because the attackers allowed them to be easily tied together. And all of this is really just based upon my reading of the indictment and other open source articles on this topic. Doubtless there's a huge amount more information that was not revealed in the indictment because of the additional information it would provide about sources and methods that the FBI had access to. But frankly, I think just this is a great case study in how these things go wrong. It demonstrates how difficult it is to do an effective job of protecting your identity, and hopefully will help people do the right in the future. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ntrepid Cast. If you enjoyed it, please give us a review. If you'd like to hear more about non-attribution and internet anonymity, please subscribe to our channel. You can also read our blogs and hear our audio podcasts at ntrepidcorp.com. Thanks for listening. Ciao.